Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential.
Before we dive in, I encourage you to subscribe on Buzzsprout or join our Patreon community for exclusive content. Your ratings and reviews help us grow, so please take a moment to share the podcast with friends and family. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds. Let's get started.
I think we need to trust in our own ripple effect in the profound impact that it can have on the world. We're always going to be learning. We're always going to be growing. There's always going to be more work to do. And all that we can actually do is work to build the foundation that is built on love and built on compassion and built on listening to one another.
Evan McDermod is a poet, tarot reader, and the dynamic host of the Fifth Dimension podcast. With a passion for spirituality and creativity, Evan's work is dedicated to guiding individuals on a transformative journey of self-discovery. Through evocative poetry and insightful tarot readings, he helps others reconnect with their true selves and embark on their own hero's journey. Evan's mission is to inspire personal growth and spiritual awakening, fostering a deep understanding of one's purpose and potential. His holistic approach blends artistic expression with spiritual exploration, offering a unique pathway to self-realization and empowerment. You're speaking our language. And then I'm going to include, if you don't mind, the intro to the Fifth Dimension. I thought it was, come on, the word story appears about 5 times in that intro. So again, we have clearly the same religion. So I am going to read that because I just love it so much. What is the truth in the stories we are told? We've been given a story of a world fueled by separation. We become separate from one another, separate from the earth, ultimately separate from the true nature of ourselves. It's time we learn the truth. It's time you rewrite your story. It's time to realign with who it is that you really are. This is the Fifth Dimension. Love that. And we can dovetail off that too. It's really just something, not to reduce your podcast to a talking point, but I would love to, dive into that more.
I love that. I've never had anybody read out my intro to me, and that gave me a little bit of goosebumps. I'm like, wow,
oh, nice.
That sounds good.
Nice.
Well, I only got cheesy at the very end.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it. That was beautiful.
I have that, have that flavor in me. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same with your blurb. Sorry for that word. Your blurb to marshal love against tyranny. I think I got this off Amazon.
Okay.
How do we marshal love against tyranny? This collection of poetic reflections explores the classic concept of good versus evil through a modern lens of love versus tyranny. Each poem serves as a self-reflective meditation to explore our own dualistic nature and how we choose to align with love or tyranny. All right, does that sound like you?
I think you hit the nail on the head.
I should say welcome, Evan McDermod.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Virginia, sorry, of course, our producer extraordinaire, Virginia.
Yep, always happy to be here, and I'm glad to talk with you today, Evan.
Thank you. Thank you. It's truly a pleasure.
Well, yeah, I've been wanting you on from day one. Virginia knows.
Yes.
You're a big inspiration to me as a podcaster, a huge influence. And I think we share a religion. I'm not going to, make too many presumptions, but I do think we're very like-minded in a lot of ways.
Definitely.
So you've absolutely informed my worldview. And I guess this is going to be a little bit of a transition. Like, you do seem, I'm sure you've heard this before, a little wise for your years.
I have heard that. I am only 28, so.
Oh, wow. See, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, neither did I. I was like, so I'm going to definitely, dovetail off Dominic on that, because, I'm going to go, you must have an old soul.
Right. That's exactly the phrase that came to mind. You've heard that too, I'm sure,
Mm.
right?
Well, it's always reassuring to hear people say that, because I don't view myself as anything too extraordinary, and I just try and be very authentic in what
Mhm.
I present and put out there. So, it's beautiful to find like-minded people like yourselves and to be
Mm.
able to just kind of connect in this way. So,
Hmm.
Well, I think you're doing good work in the world and contributing to, right? At least we're contributing to the collective or to the conversation. And
mhm.
that's pretty much, I don't know, maybe all we can do.
I was gonna
But
say that is all we can do for sure.
well, anyway, we'll get into that in a bit. But I don't mean it in a condescending way. I really resonate with everything you're putting out into the universe, and I would say, just own it. You are an old soul. You are wise beyond your years. But I'm going to go way out on a limb and say I think you're a thought leader and a
Mhm.
sage.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah. So on that front, I listened to an episode of your podcast recently. I've listened to many episodes,
Mhm.
but in preparation for this one, where I was coming up with my prompts, I did listen to a few recent ones, and I wish I could remember the guest's name, but I think the two of you were talking about. There can be wisdom that's very theoretical, right?
Mhm.
And it's solid, but it always has more resonance when there's the life experience to back it up.
Right.
So I love that about you. But the reason I brought up the fact that I see you as a thought leader, really on the cutting edge, is because I want to, for the listeners, because I want to bring them up to speed. I may know more than even Virginia. One of your earliest episodes, you had a former professor on, one of your former professors. Is your
Mhm.
background in sociology or anthropology, cultural anthropology? Can you refresh me on that? What's your
Yeah.
background?
So I actually, the professor I had on, I had him for a counseling class. So I did a little bit of the social sciences and counseling, but my major was actually in education. So I
Mm-hmm.
have a teaching degree. I've studied. I had a double major in education and history. So I kind of come from the researching history background and
Mm-hmm.
very much kind of going through the stories of history. That's really where I got my, I would say, my drive to really learn and unpack stories. But over the last couple of years I've been very driven towards myth and very driven towards theology and anthropology in particular, so, and psychology, of course, and counseling.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well,
uh
it's like a Venn diagram, right? They all intersect
mhm.
for sure.
Hmm.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
might intersect in Young.
Oh,
Or Joseph
100%.
Campbell and Young, right? Well,
Hmm.
the psychology aspects.
Right.
I love that. Yep.
Yeah.
Do you see why he's the ideal guest, Virginia?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you are a walking Venn diagram. Is that what it's called? Venn
That
diagram?
is a Venn diagram. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've never been called a walking Venn diagram, but that I really like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, again, it's pretty much what we're all about here is,
Mhm.
well, the function. Well, on that, here's our transition. We're starting to ask a rote question straight out the gate of our
Mhm.
guests in the spirit of the podcast.
Mhm.
So, what would you say is the role of storytelling in culture? It's pretty broad. And the part B is, has that role evolved over time or has it remained the same?
Mm. Oh, what a beautiful question! Because I mean, that's a question I feel I've been on the quest to discover over
Mm-hmm.
the last several years myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I live out in South Dakota right now, and I'm very getting to know a lot of natives in particular who live here, who live right near a reservation, and a lot of people from the reservation come into town and live in town now. But
Mm-hmm.
I
What
listen.
tribes do you,
So the Lakota tribe is
right?
probably the most prominent in the area that I am, and the Lakota tribe is one of the biggest tribes
Oh, yeah. You
in the
said
whole
South
state.
Dakota, right?
Yep, out in South
Yeah.
Dakota, and
Mm-hmm.
I've spent time all over the country, so this isn't where I'm originally from. But one aspect that I've really appreciated about being here, which you wouldn't necessarily think about South Dakota, is the rich storytelling. To sit around the campfire on a Saturday night and have people just telling stories about their culture and their
Mm-hmm.
myths and what they grew up learning about, whether it's stories about the gods and the astrological deities and kind of hearing about culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized when I was kind of growing up, I didn't feel a deep like connection to my own I would say cultural myths and cultural roots,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's a big part as we're evolving in Western culture, what are the stories that we really have as tradition? As I
Mhm.
think stories
Mm,
define tradition, it defines our day to day, it defines how we carry ourselves internally first,
Mhm.
right? How we
yeah.
align ourselves. And
Mhm.
so I think the stories that we end up telling ourselves are the stories that we are going to create in our reality and ultimately live by.
Mhm.
So I think it's really important to, at least for me, this is what I've been attempting to do, is I want to write my story. What is it that I truly like sets my heart on fire, right? What is it that makes us who we are? How is it that we connect? Where is it that we find common ground? What is it that we actually want to achieve? Where is it that we actually come from, right? How can we recognize this is such a unique and diverse world, and we're so globally interconnected before, right? That I think
Mm.
there's a new global story that is emerging. So it's like,
That's
how do we want to write that story,
yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
I think that's kind of the era that we're in right now, and the story itself has been one that is really fueled by a lot. There's the materialism and consumption, and you could say all these things about Western culture that are sort of on the shadow side. But
Mm.
I do think there is a new story. As I'm connecting with people, and maybe this is just my own lens that I'm looking through, and so I'm finding others to connect in this way. But there's a story of unity and
Mhm.
connection
Mhm.
and love that it kind of goes beyond just the, well, what do you do for a living? What is well,
Right.
all the
Right.
standard ways that we're kind of taught to define ourselves by. So
I have to jump in there. Have you ever read The Little Prince, Le Petit Prince?
I have not, no.
Have you, Virginia? The Little
Oh,
Prince. It's a classic.
yes, yes, and all my kids have too. I've shared it with them.
Yeah, you might really enjoy that. It's uh Antoine Saint-Exupéry. Exupéry.
Okay, I'm gonna
Anyway,
write
it's a
that down.
children's classic, but it's really profound. And I just made that connection. Basically, it just talks, and again, it doesn't really read well in English. It
Mm,
just lands differently in French because it's such a poetic language.
yep.
But it's basically the kid is like, why do the grand person, the adults, the grown ups, why do they always ask, basically, what do you do? How much, what do you do for a living? How much do you make? It's like, and he says, why not? I wish I'm going to totally botch it. But the whole book is about love and how, right, everything else is sort of, I don't know, a matrix, right?
Mhm,
But it's just beautiful because it's from a child's perspective, which is maybe our essence, right? Our
mhm,
core essence, and just questioning. Like, there's a great scene: the drink of the buveur, the drunkard. I drink because I'm ashamed,
mhm,
and I'm ashamed because I drink, and it's just the vicious cycle that is mind and ego, right? And the path that intellect brings us down. Whereas, oh, and the best quote from it, the most famous quote is, uh, "Anything essential." Something like all that is essential can only be seen with the heart.
mm. I love that.
Yeah, that the whole book kind of is variations on that theme.
Mm.
So sorry to interrupt you.
Oh no, no, please do. I love hearing that. I wrote that down so I can add that to my reading. I feel like I have a growing list of books that I have.
Oh, so yeah,
I need to open. They're sitting on my shelf. I'm like, I got so many,
right.
and I keep ordering
That's
more and
every
more.
other word out of my mouth is like, I'll add that to my list.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Oh, another book to read. I guess I'll just have to keep reading. Keep exploring.
Yeah,
Uh,
no, this one's short and sweet.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. It'll be a nice read it in a nice afternoon. Sit out in the sun and read the book. So, and yeah, and I think what I was just saying is very much in line with what you're talking about. It's like, can we find a a higher calling in the form of our storytelling, but also in the same sense, if we look back, I'm sort of just starting to get into Greek myth, for example. I'm really not familiar with a lot of the Greek mythological stories, but I'm starting to, I was reading deep on the story of Eros yesterday, right, and the
Mhm.
Greek god of love and passion. And eventually he evolved into Cupid in the Roman mythology, and there's some differences over the years and cultural differences between the stories, but
Mhm.
it's like, where can we find ourselves in these figures that were already constructed for us, right? And I think when we look back on stories and we look back on mythology and we back at what already was presented, really all those stories are just different archetypes of ideas and emotions and parts of things that live within ourself, right? So
Mhm.
it's like, how can we uncover the archetypal wisdom that is ever present within us in a world that is so focused on the materialistic physical body and not nurturing the soul and not nurturing love and not prioritizing what it is that actually brings us fulfillment? Because,
Mhm.
why does the drunkard drink? Well, he feels ashamed. Well, why does he feel ashamed? Because he drinks. Well, where is that? Where is that really stemming from? What could he replace that with? Right? It's not as simple with people who struggle with addiction or struggle, uh, with depression and all these really deeply rooted issues. It's not as simple as just eliminating it. We actually need to feed a part of our soul that is suffering, yeah, right, and
Mm,
and
mm.
really nourish ourselves in that way.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to make any huge, broad statements here, but it's almost like all dysfunction can be traced back to disconnection from self, right? From
Right.
your core essence, from your
Absolutely.
authentic self. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm the same way in that I feel like early on in my podcasting and my writing, I wanted to make like, well, this is what the world thinks, or this is what people think. And it's like, all right, I don't want to speak for everybody. I can really only speak for myself. But all of my dysfunction certainly
Mm.
stems from a disconnect from myself. Right.
Well,
And
and also maybe disconnection from the collective, right? So
Mhm.
interconnectivity, when we isolate, we're actually it's not a good path, right?
Right. Absolutely.
It never ends well.
Right. There's a time and place to be the hermit and to
Mm.
go inward and seek solitude, but I think true joy and true meaning is shared. It's a shared uh nourishment. I feed
Well, I
you,
guess
you
I was
feed me.
hinting that as far as like the evolution of our noosphere, right, which is,
Hmm.
in my opinion, as crucial as that of our biology, right? If we're going to keep adapting, right? And what's the other alternate? You adapt or die, right?
Right.
So if our noosphere has to continually evolve, it almost seems like if we're not contributing what we're called upon, right, our unique, authentic gifts back to the collective, it's a form of isolation. And
Hmm.
then when you see people that actually destroy rather than create, it's usually because there's a little bit of, I love this word, solipsism. So the ultimate in detachment is sociopathy, right? And
Hmm.
what's the other one? Narcissism. That's a really popular word right now. And
Right.
so you see it all the time. And in a way, I have a lot of faith in the dialectic, right? That even the uncomfortable things that surface, the pendulum swings, the regressions, they have value. So that takes a lot of faith to see things that way, right? I would pray things come to pass just as they are. But
Hmm.
seemingly destructive forces that arise in our dialectic sometimes have value. So when you see somebody that's so isolated, if that makes sense, and so disconnected that mental illness sets in, right? They're
Hmm.
being used by the universe in a very different way than those who are connected to the collective and
Hmm.
operating on love. Does
Right.
that make a little bit of sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's giving us a glimpse into the shadow aspects of
Mm,
the psyche and ourselves, because we really have to be willing to put ourselves into anybody's shoes, and recognize that, they are serving a a beautiful role in a sense, right? It's like the idea of what Ram Dass used to talk about, where, he's talking about the children starving in Africa, or the psychopath or sociopath, and who's running a menace in our society. And, there is a lot of people who are in the spotlight who are
mm,
divisive, and,
mm,
there's vitriol and
mm,
hatred. And, there's very strong
mm,
emotions and, triggers that we all feel within ourselves when we witness it.
mm,
But I think it can give us a glimpse into who it is that we are when we let allow ourselves to be unchecked in that way, and we do
mm,
isolate, and we do let ourselves really be run by the shadow.
mm,
And
mhm,
we have to acknowledge the shadow if we're actually going to find a sense of wholeness, because none of us are perfect in the certain circumstances. I was likely the
mm.
sociopath, or I, I was.
Right.
There's a great Thich Nhat Hanh poem about that,
Mm,
and it's called "Call Me by My True Names," and it's a very short.
mm.
I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. It's a
Oh,
very
I think I've read that. Yeah.
and it's he talks about, I am the girl who's being sold to the
Mm,
pirates,
mm-hmm.
off of the, off whatever coast. I am also the pirate, right?
Yes, yes, yes,
You
yes.
know,
Mhm.
so
I love Thich Nhat Hanh. He's amazing.
hmm truly a one of the most influential thought leaders for me personally.
Hmm.
I've learned a lot from just taking that mindful approach. But and yeah, I think we just need to put ourselves in that perspective.
Exactly, right.
You know,
We all have the shadow, and we have, yeah, anything humanity is capable lives in us, right? Capable
hmm
of lives in us.
Yeah.
But also, I think too, when you get in a real divisive, I was born in 19, speaking of Thich Nhat Hanh, I was born in 1968, the height of Vietnam.
hmm
And literally just like this election, I don't want to get too political, but just like
hmm
this election cycle, these same exact phenomena happened where there
hmm
was, the Democratic National Convention. It was one of the most, one of the low points in police brutality. So many
hmm
things happened that year. Martin Luther King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was assassinated. And then the next year was the moon landing and Woodstock, for God's sake, right?
hmm
So sometimes when our shadow surfaces, right, or when things are really polarized or divisive, which is the word of the day, like you were hinting at, that's so that we can diagnose, right?
hmm
If something's in shadow and we're sweeping it under the carpet, we don't get to write our own story, right? So when forces rear their ugly heads, it's something to address.
Right. Absolutely. And that's something to speak on a personal level. Like a lot of my poetry, I try and sit with my own shadow. Sometimes I think
Mm-hmm.
poetic expression and creativity, it's not all rainbows and
I was gonna say
butterflies
puppy dogs.
yeah, right? It's not
Right.
all light and love. I think the true uh internal shift and awakening comes when you actually do sit in that
Mm,
pain, whether it's personal pain or you're looking at the pain of the collective and you're attempting to diagnose it and just be authentic and real about it. I
mhm.
think that's where the
Yeah.
real magic starts to happen. And
Virginia, do you remember the definition of compassion? It's come up on here a little bit.
I don't remember.
Compassion. Well, I think it's the
mm,
Latin. It's the Latin
Yeah,
root.
yeah, and
I don't remember.
To sit with, to sit
stuff.
with the pain.
Yeah,
You don't fix it. You don't give advice. You just sit with the
Well, and
pain. That's true compassion.
yeah, and I was gonna say, especially like listening to what you're saying, Evan, too, is I had a professor when we were talking and we got into in my psychology class, we were talking about the shadow and what that really represented. What I walked away from that class profoundly from my professor was is when we're in the shadow mode, when we're in those really vulnerable moments, as painful as it may feel at the time, and it's hard to see, it's also where we're in the most teachable moments of our lives too,
Mm,
because when
mhm.
things are good, we're more reluctant to being taught versus when things are bad.
mm,
Right.
absolutely. I've
Well, the
learned
reason I
more from
brought up
rock bottoms than anywhere else.
right, that's why I brought up like 1968, right, and 1969. It's the whole intro to Language of the Soul. My book is strife always signals change.
Mhm,
So when you have back-to-back world events like that, right? The world is on fire in 1968, and then the way I put it is like, the moon landing speaks to our man's march toward human potential, right? And
mhm,
then Woodstock is literally the quintessence of our interconnectivity. It's always been framed that way. So yeah, strife signals change. We say that every week on here, right? And as far as the artistic expression part of it, don't you think? I mean, I've been coming up against this a little bit lately, and my sister and I are a kind of writing club of two. And so, how many times can we preface our work by saying it's a moment in time, it's an expression of pain, it's
mhm,
not the puppy dogs and the rainbows, but that's how you arrive at the policy for your life, right? Is by redeeming your world through expressing that pain sometimes.
mhm,
So I have to, you know, my journey lately is like, fuck everyone who's going to judge me for this expression.
mhm,
It- and it's usually people that feel indicted, by the way. But I have
mhm,
to not worry about the outcome, if that makes sense. Is my sister going to read it? Is my mom, my dad or my mom going to read it? A
mhm.
great writer has to detach from the outcome and all of that. So I've just been allowing myself to express pain. When I was in therapy, my therapist would, one of the few times I was in therapy, she would say, "Can you just stay in one camp?" Meaning I would quickly exonerate if I talked about somebody that had betrayed me or that I felt had betrayed me, or, you know, I always exonerated the perpetrator in the next breath because I'm so judicious. And she
Right.
would say, just stay in one camp.
Mm.
So in my writing, I try to do that and understand it as a momentary expression of pain. And then I think collectively that's how we do write our own story, and we work through our, Aristotle would call it, our complexes.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I definitely resonate with that deeply because early on, especially in my poetry, I would, my mom listens to everything that I do, and it is will probably listen to this podcast, right? I'll send it to
Hi,
her.
Mom.
She'll listen to it. Hi, Mom. Love you. But, so early on, I'm hesitant to like say certain things or do certain things because, like, well, I don't want her to know that I'm hurting so bad, or I don't
Mm,
want to put this out there, or I don't want to indict somebody or
mm.
something, or
Humanity.
cause. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Who am I to judge? Is like sort of my own. That's an internal battle. I still have to recognize when it's present, right? But it's as long as it's coming from this is the authenticity of what I'm feeling and what the reality is. When you're expressing it authentically, it isn't it isn't so much an indictment, right? People take whatever they're going to want to take from our writing, from our creative expression, from our words. And as
Mhm,
long as we are conscious in well, first our own intent, but then
mhm.
backing that intent up with action and with expression, we really do have to detach from the outcome. And, and that can be even just in how we go through our day to day. And, maybe sometimes the intent is good, but then the action it falls on its face and we screw up or whatever it is, and that's when we take conscious ownership and accountability, right? So
Mhm.
Mhm.
and that's again also where the learning takes place. So it's there's no perfect formula to going about it except holding true to the what it is that we're feeling and connecting with and attempting to articulate it in the best ways that we know how to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good policy in life, just detaching from outcome.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely. Or attempting to at least.
Right,
We're
right.
always going to have a little bit of, well, I hope it goes this way, but if it goes the other way, I'm not going to beat myself up for it. Or, I can sit in, in the comfort of knowing I did my best. And, this is
Mhm,
something for me too, even like, sometimes my poems I really, I find myself fascinated by the concept of, and I don't come from a religious background or I'm not a Christian. I'm very, I would say, entering in and out of different theologies and religious concepts because I find it fascinating. But I'm fascinated with the concept of like a rapture or a judgment day or the
mhm.
day where we are forced to take accountability of our actions, right? And
Or
Mhm.
one of
I
my
like the,
poems, yeah.
mhm.
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
I like the word atone.
Mm,
We're all being called upon to make reparations, to atone.
mhm.
And anyway, I know the poem you're hinting at. What's the name of it?
Well, there's a few. I did a counting on how many poems mention either the word judgment or mention the word rapture. I did a control F in my document, and it was something like 10 to 12 poems mention that word itself. Or there's one that's about it's lovers in Armageddon, and there's let's see, I got my book here. There's Judgment Day. There's just so that concept is something I hold myself to, and
Mhm,
I kind of try and hint at for other people, but not in the sense of like, well, God's going to come from the sky and demand all of us, cry and get down on our knees and be sorry and this and that. But it's more of like, okay, if today is my day of judgment or today is my day of atonement, as you said,
mhm,
am I willing to be accountable with myself? Am I
mhm.
willing to own up to, okay, this is the shadows within me. This is where I've been. This is who I've been. This is what I've done. And
Well,
okay,
Forever Felt Like Home is one of the poems that makes
yes,
reference to the
it does.
rapture. Yeah, and the note that I took on that one was, I mean, it just kind of occurred to me that is a lot of traditions take the parables in the Bible and kind of understand them as aspects of the human condition. It's not just not don't take it literally, take it as a parable, but it's like these are conditions that will recur in life.
Right.
So if heaven is something you can create for yourself on a daily basis, and it's a Hades as a concept or hell as a concept, it's somewhere we go when we're in turmoil before the clouds part and we have that reckoning.
Hmm.
I took that poem. I just wrote a note that, yeah, internal strife, conflict, demons will repeatedly present themselves and will be facing an apocalypse throughout life, right? And it's something you have to emerge. You'll have your dark night of the soul, and then you'll have your hopefully redemption and transformation. It
Right.
recurs. Is that the way you understand a rapture
Absolutely.
or an Armageddon
you are
apocalypse?
right. You articulated that, I think, better than I have ever been able to articulate in the way you just did, because
Well,
that's
I did it in a clinical way, but you did it in a poetic way in the piece.
right.
I just made it clinical.
Well, I've never strived to express the way of expressing that in that sense, and that was really beautiful, because that is exactly where I would say I express myself poetically, and
Mm,
it is to, find a sense of understanding within it, and then use it as a catalyst to grow. And
mhm,
the last poem, or the last line in that poem, is about letting go, right? So, all right, in particular, I think, for
mm,
myself, and I know I
mm.
can speak to others with this, it's like we tend to hold on to those demons, or we tend to hold on to the pain and the strife, because it's so familiar that we don't know who we're going to be without it, right?
Right,
And
right.
so it can kind of become a lifelong Armageddon, like you
Mm,
speak, because it is defining how we go about in the world, or how we walk through life. And if we're not willing to own it for what it is, and face it and sit with it and be in it, then yeah, it is going to keep that cycle is going to keep repeating, and we
right.
can't be surprised by that. And
Yeah, we have to bring our demons out into the light to
Mhm.
transform them.
Right, absolutely. And it's interesting, because I've always asked this question, and I'd love to hear your take on this question too. Here I am asking questions on your podcast, but
It's a conversation.
it is,
Yeah.
and but I've always kind of sat with the concept of, all right, when am I healing versus when am I healed? Is there ever a
Mhm.
healed?
We
Is
never, the answer is we never arrive.
right, right, and it's like, at the same
Right,
time,
Virginia?
Hmm.
and
It's kind of
it's
where the three of us are like distributed in age. Just, I think the gap between Virginia and I is closer than the one between you and us. But
mhm,
I mean, I didn't mean to. I was being a little facetious, but
right. Well,
I
and
would I would say we don't arrive, and we will come up against themes in our lives, maybe until we break them. But I
mhm,
don't know that we do. Well,
that's
recurring. Well, we have peptide addictions, put it that way, right?
mhm.
So if you internalized negative messaging in your childhood that you're a klutz, you're going to find a way to spill a drink at a party, right?
Right.
If you are codependent, you're going to find an alcoholic across the room at a party, no matter what. And then
Mhm.
everybody would say, if they have a spiritual bone in their body, or sometimes even if not, they'll say, "Why am I marrying the same type of person over and over again?" It's kind of weird, but my boyfriends were always my mom.
Mhm. Mhm. Right. And I'd say my first girlfriend was my mom too. So I get
Right.
it.
Right. But
I
when you
get it.
see it for the fifth time, you're like, okay, on an epigenetic level, I'm meant to fix this so that I don't pass it on to my offspring, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But anyway, I think themes will recur because of these peptide addictions, unless
Right.
or until we break them.
Yeah.
However, I don't know that we do ever really break them. We're going to fuck up our kids no matter what. Sorry.
Right. Well, they'll have their own growth and their own learning to do. And, ideally, they'll be better than us and grow in different ways that we weren't able to. And it's
Exactly.
interesting, because I've come to the same conclusion as you on that, where it's like, I don't know if we ever there is no destination per
Right,
se of,
right, right.
I am healed, I am fully enlightened, because then what's the point? Then what else is there to do?
Mm-hmm.
And it's, we will come to understanding and acceptance of different uh aspects of our
Mm-hmm.
lives, and just, I think the real growth occurs when you recognize that alcoholic from across the bar.
And you make a different choice. You write a new story, right?
you write a new story. That's exactly it. And the
Right.
old scars are always going to be there,
Hmm.
and that's okay. They tell a story themselves.
Well, let me ask you. I thought I detected a theme. Now, I didn't read the whole collection.
Mhm,
Unfortunately, I read as much as I could for today, and I'm really enjoying it. But I didn't finish the collection "To
mhm.
Martial Love Against Tyranny." But between the poems and any body of work within a finite period of time is going to take on themes,
Yeah.
whether we like it or not, based on our worldview. I
Yes.
thought I saw a theme of like, do I I don't know, find my way out of this Armageddon, or do I just check out entirely? Like,
Mm,
and we've all been there. We've all not been suicidal, but we've all been depressed enough to go, have I done everything I'm here to do? And I did. I personally reached a point where I felt like I was done with my body. Like spiritually, felt very evolved, not to brag,
mhm,
but I felt pretty evolved. And I thought, I'm kind of done with my body. But I ended up digging my heels in and saying, no, there's more to do. And
mhm.
I felt, and that really fueled my sense of purpose and blah, blah, blah. Did I imagine that theme of like, when do I throw in the towel? It's on my mind because, my mom just passed in January, and it's not for anyone else to say like, oh no, she gave up on life, or she was so disillusioned with the world. Death isn't always that. I do think it's a choice in a lot of cases to go, right, Virginia?
Mhm.
It's a
Mhm.
choice to go, but
Yes,
a spiritual choice.
it is.
But it
Yeah.
doesn't mean, like, if you've matured or evolved spiritually to the point where you've done everything you're here to do, go for it. Check out. But I sometimes the reasons don't hold water for me. It's like because they weren't allowed to dot dot dot, or
Mhm.
the circumstances and the card they were dealt didn't allow them to dot dot dot. Anyway, did I imagine a theme of like, do I throw in the towel and frame it in the most virtuous way? Think, oh, I am completely evolved, and maybe in the next life I'll have a new challenge, but I've done everything I'm here to do. Did I imagine, or do I work through this and decide to stay above ground?
No, you hit the nail on the head. That's definitely a conversation I've had with myself over the last several
Mm,
years. And I lost my dad probably almost 10 years ago now, right? And so the theme of death is something that comes up for me a lot. It's not something I run away from. And I was there. It was me and my girlfriend at the time, and he was in the ICU, had lung cancer, and when he decided to go, he was ready, right? He went,
mhm,
and I was there to witness the transition between him being alive. I mean, in a very sedated and state, hardly
Mhm.
present in the way he was, even a couple months before that. But he was still there, and then to witness the transition between life and then there's the lifeless body, and actually
mm,
kind of experience. I mean, it was a very moving experience to feel what that was like, because there's almost a profound sense of, like, when I look back on it, that moment, even though he was dying, it was filled with so much love, and it was filled with so much
mm,
compassion. It was like the most connection I had ever felt to him in any moment
mm,
was when I sat there and said, "Okay, you could," because I saw the heart rate monitor going down,
mhm,
and he is somebody who is very much a fighter, and he wanted to be there for me and my two brothers, and had all this other stuff he wanted to do. But I remember I said, "Okay, you can go now. We're gonna be okay. We're gonna be all right.
mm,
We're gonna make it." And
mhm.
from and
Did
not
you, out of complete curiosity, did you verbalize it, or did you mentally?
I did say that out loud. I did say that
Okay,
out loud. I was there kind of sitting by his bedside talking to him a
right.
little bit. And I did get him to like kind of squeeze my hand, and like, so I knew he could hear me. Like,
Hmm.
even though he was sedated, I knew he could actually hear me and connect, like, even if he couldn't say anything,
Hmm.
he was actually still somewhat there. So
Yeah, yeah,
when I verbalized that, it wasn't 3 breaths later that he transitioned on, right?
right,
And so ever
right.
since then,
Sounds
actually,
very familiar.
ever witnessing death in itself really prevents you from being able to run away from the concept and the theme of it. And it's something I still very much explore within myself and my own poetry. And I'm very much at the point where it's like, I guess if I were to pass away today, I certainly don't have any intention of doing that at the,
Mm,
but I would be in acceptance of it, in the sense where I'm doing all that I can each day to fulfill the drive and the purpose that I feel within myself while I'm gifted to be here. And I've had the points where I look at mankind, and I look at the direction we're going in, and I look at the struggles I've faced, and I'm like, well, what really is the purpose, the point? Like, is there have I done all that I can?
mm,
And I think a lot of times our actual it's difficult because a lot of times the difference that we make, it really can't be quantified,
Mm-hmm.
so we can't always know what kind of difference
Right.
we're making,
Well,
especially in
I have this theory that like your legacy is never what you would want it to be. It is the people you touched without knowing it.
Mm,
And right, it's the people that you made a difference with without even knowing it.
right, 100%. And I've thought about that very question. Well, what would I want my legacy to be?
Hmm.
And for me, it's very simple. I would like somebody when I pass away to say, "Oh, Evan, he had a good heart. He was
Hmm.
compassionate. He was kind." And so, as long as I'm here, there's an opportunity to continue expanding upon that, and connect
Hmm.
with more people, touch more people in that way, heart to heart, soul to soul. Right? Really explore. So the idea of death, I know it's a certainty, it's an inevitability, so I'll embrace it when the day comes. I know I anticipate being here for a very long time, but definitely in this book, there's times in my own pain and my own challenges where death would probably be the easier solution, right? It would
Hmm.
probably be the easier solution, but I don't like easy solutions. So that's not an option, right? I
Well,
know
one of
that.
the pieces is literally titled "If I Died Today," right?
Right, yeah, and that's gonna
Well,
be
I
in
think
my yep.
we kind of got immediately off in the weeds, in my
Mhm.
opinion. I have some like pre-written questions that I want to get back to, but because we went down this rabbit hole, I mean, is it logical to read either "If I Died Today" or the other poem we made reference to, which
Yeah,
was "Frozen"? Was it,
yeah,
or or was
either.
it "Forever Felt Like
Yeah,
Home"
we mentioned
about
"Forever Felt Like
Armageddon?
Home,"
Yeah.
and that was about Armageddon. Since we're on the topic of death, I'll read "If I Died Tonight."
Tonight.
This
Okay.
and this one is actually,
I was trying to rush it. I made it today instead of tonight.
well, same day, same day,
Okay.
same
All
concept,
right.
and this one is actually gonna be in my upcoming poetry collection. So it isn't Into
Ah,
Martial
okay.
Love Against Tyranny,
Hmm.
but the next poetry collection will be out in the next month or two. So, and when it comes out, I'll send you guys a copy of it. I'd love to have your as a gift of my appreciation towards you.
Hmm.
I'd love to just give one to you.
Awesome.
Um,
Thank you.
but yeah, I'll read it, and it's one that this time of year, autumn in particular, is always I don't know why it's in the autumn. I think just with the changing of seasons, and
Mm,
the leaves start dying, and
right.
the
It's
change.
melancholy, right? It's the
Mhm.
end. It's an ending of sorts. So,
Right, exactly. So this is one I wrote in the last month or so, and I did a spoken word on Instagram for it too. But I'll read it to you, and it's very much touches on what we just talked about. So this one's titled "If I Died Tonight." If I died tonight, I can rest, saying I tried to live it right. Despite the burdens and the hardships of my pain, I carried on, knowing the weight behind my name. If I died tonight, I'd like you to know I put up a fight. When picking up the pieces of my shattered heart, I never hid from the world the reality of my scars. If I died tonight, I hope to be remembered like the sun, shining bright. From whispers in the wind to the stars above, you will always feel my presence, or you will always feel me through the presence of love. If I die tonight, wipe away the tears. Let truth guide your sight. It's okay to cry and let yourself mourn, but trust, we are infinite. Soon again I'll be born. If I died tonight, I'd give my last condolences to the game of life. While I was only given a limited time to play, I can accept God's calling on this judgment day. If I died tonight, please take my hand, lead me to the light. Turns out I've always been afraid to let go, so together we can be brave in the last moment that I'll know. If I die tonight, I want you to know it's gonna be all right. In your heart, I live forever, so let yourself move on. The world will keep on turning long after I am gone. If I die tonight.
beautiful. Wow. I love your not to talk about form over concept,
Mm,
but I like your use of rhyme is really um, not heavy-handed. What do you call it? Like graceful. I really loved the use of rhyme. Anyway, Virginia, I've read it. You're hearing it for the first time. Any reaction?
it, it obviously it hits really personally to me.
Mm,
So I, as Evan doesn't know, so Dominic lost his mom this year. I've recently just lost my mom this year,
very
and she,
recent, right?
yeah, very recent. I'm trying not to cry.
Mm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Oh no,
I've been
it's totally
wondering when
fine.
you were going to chime in and hoping you would,
Yeah,
but
no, and it does resonate. And when you guys were kind of talking about how, and the poem does, it hits perfectly for this time of year. 'Cause my mom actually happens to be a Halloween baby.
mhm,
And then of course I understand the seasons of change and the whole death of life at this time, so it can be reborn in spring.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I mean, it's a transition, but it's not a sad transition. It's just a more of a, gosh, I'm trying to think of the right word for it, a very solace kind of time
mm,
of reflection, of of remembering. So you could call it a reckoning, to where you have to kind of face the truths
mm,
that you've recently experienced, as you wait for the new light to come in the
mm,
spring, to of course be reborn. I mean, you can also equate it to the mythological creature, the phoenix, as
mm,
well. You know,
Mhm.
and death rise, and in death rises a new birth of life. So,
mhm.
or a new chapter, a new season.
Yeah,
Thank,
really beautiful.
thank you, and my condolences to both of you and uh, your moms. I mean, there's no easy way to process death and the whole concept of it. Even,
Mm,
I think one of the most powerful pieces of art, I'll say art, that I've seen on death. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Midnight Gospel, Duncan Trussell's animation type of series, and it's on Netflix. And
mm,
Hmm.
it's really just excerpts from his podcast, actually, that he took clips from his podcast and he put it into on like an animation storyline going with the podcast. So
right.
it's a really fascinating concept. But the final episode, his mom had terminal cancer and was so he recorded a podcast with her, and the full podcast is worth listening to. The show is about 30 minutes of the actual conversation, but to hear the conversation he was having with his mom about her impending death,
Mm,
and he says something along, she says, I'm not a special case, and he says, well, yeah, you are. And she goes, well, that's just because I'm your mom, right? And he says, yeah, but how do you mourn, how do you accept it, like how do you even begin to process it? And it was just, all she responded was, you
mhm,
cry, and
Yeah.
you feel into it,
mhm.
right? And it was a very touching moment to see that.
You
And
know, yeah, I don't know if this is related or not, but my parents didn't take us to funerals. I don't know why. Either not many people in our circle passed when we were children, or my parents were protecting us from it. I don't know. But my first loved one that passed, I was in college, and it was tragic and untimely, unfortunately. So I got the call, and I just burst into tears. I had no experience with death, and I
Mhm.
remember, but it was tragic and untimely. She was quite young. But then the first funeral was my grandfather's. And same thing, we held his hand. We all made our peace one Thanksgiving weekend. All 10 cousins, without discussing it, went in there and gave him a permission. And in my case, I promised him, his legacy would live on through me. And I let him know what an influence he was on me, and your legacy is intact. Don't worry. And we all said that you're free to go.
Mhm.
And he left. He went that Monday after everybody had vacated. So I've seen that a million times with my mom. There was no kumbaya moment, is how I put it in my recent memoir. Like, we didn't
Mhm.
stand around with candles and to give her permission, but we all stole our closure, is how I put it, according to our schedules. That same week, we knew it was, right around the corner. And so we all made our peace in our own way, according to our own schedules. And then lo and behold, she passed. But of course, my dad was the last one to give her permission, and that day is the day she died. So anyway, we've probably all seen this, right? But I
Mhm.
guess my point is, at my grandfather's funeral, the first one I had been to, I found it very healing. right? Of course, the service has a lot to do with it. Do you make it a celebration? Do you pay tribute? Is it a memorial? What is the tone and flavor? And it was very celebratory. But I remember even the tears were just very healing. It felt like a good cry, as they say.
Mhm.
The only bad cries I have to do with betrayal, like the poisonous, toxic feelings in life.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with the natural cycles. Loss is a natural part of life, if that makes sense.
Mm.
The sort of shadow side of human nature, the disappointing side of human nature, is the only thing that gets to me on a toxic level. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I
Not
have
that I
a
love funerals. I don't like seek
right.
out
No,
funerals.
yeah. I remember one time I told somebody, and they said, "Evan, that is such a dark way to look at the world." And I didn't think it was, but I told somebody this, and it was that um, every single relationship we have in our lives, for one person or the other, is going to end in either death or heartbreak. Every single one of them, right?
Keep going.
And I said, and they're like, "Wow, that is, that I don't want to think about that. That's not a positive way to look at things." But I was attempting to articulate it from the sense that grief is the natural byproduct of love. They're the same.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have one without the other. If you're going to love, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
grieve, or
I just used the phrase in a story I just finished. Love without risk.
mm,
It's a
mm,
contradiction in terms, right?
mm-hmm,
Like,
100%.
yeah, I said something like, while waiting for love without risk, my currency dried up. Like, it ain't gonna happen.
Right, exactly, exactly. And we have to be willing to. I, I guess we don't have to be willing to accept it, but at some point it's going to hit us in that way. And, I find it very fascinating that on a cultural level, particular in Western culture, it's not like
Mm,
this in all cultures,
mhm,
that we run from we run
mhm.
from the
Mhm.
concept of
Yeah.
death,
Of
right?
course.
We run from the like when somebody dies, they quickly take away the body. You're not allowed to, you
Right.
don't see it,
Right.
and it's very much
Yeah.
it can be a very dark time. But
Mhm,
if we kind of reframed our way of processing it in the moment, I think it
right.
can be a very healing experience, and then kind of give us a bit more grace as we go through life, because we recognize how fragile love is and how
Yes, yes.
finite our connections are. In a sense, the
Mhm,
only thing that's going to live on after somebody dies is the love that you shared,
mhm,
right? Just because somebody dies doesn't mean the love goes away. We can all
mhm,
still go inward and feel that and connect with that, and if
mhm,
anything, it grows stronger. So I think if we can stop running away from it within ourselves first, it kind of puts us into a new perspective on how we show up in our relationships, because we can be a bit more graceful and want to connect in the way that, because if we're unconscious to it, it's very easy to burn bridges, or
mhm,
be a bit more careless in our relationships, and that's not how
mhm,
anyone wants to go out.
mhm,
you know if you knew that this is the last time you're ever going to speak to somebody, everybody's heard a story where, oh, I wish I could have
mhm,
corrected this, or taken this back, and that was the last time I ever spoke to him. Nobody wants to go out like that.
Right.
All
Right.
right.
Well, yeah,
So
to back up a little bit, I went to La Paz, Mexico for Day of, or I didn't plan it. We just happened to be there on Day of the Dead.
mm,
And it's night and day, the degree to which,
Mhm.
right, death is embraced, and it's an opportunity, like I think we're hinting at, to celebrate your ancestors and those who have passed. But I think it's symbolic of, yeah, that gratitude. You have to recognize what's right in front of you, right, by witnessing the absence of it, right?
mm,
And so you appreciate what you've got when you realize it's finite, it's fleeting, it's a gift. And
yeah.
life is a gift. It's not a given.
Right.
There are no guarantees. So
Ex-
yeah.
exactly. And to kind of bring it full circle in a sense to where I think this topic originated from, like how I show up in
Mm,
a way where you said you kind of recognize that theme of death, or kind of giving up hope in
mm,
my own
mm,
poetry. It's like that in itself is what drives the day to day. It doesn't, I don't need to have one specific thing I need to accomplish, or I need to leave people with this one thing or this and that. Like, my purpose each day is to show up and be loving and caring and
Mm-hmm.
compassionate. And for me, that, if I can do that, that's enough.
Mm-hmm.
That's really all I need to do. Other than that,
Well, but
everything
it's
else is
almost like if each one of us was able to reach that place where we're just, choosing every day to see the world through the eyes of love. And you said tyranny. I would love to explore what that means exactly. But I often say, every moment you can transform fear to love. And Marianne Williamson would say that's the definition of a miracle, the shift
hmm
from fear to love. So if you just do that all day, every day, even if you don't leave your block, which I don't because I don't have a car, but you experience the world, and even if on a grassroots level, your friends and family benefit from that, the ripple effect would do the rest, right?
right.
And so be the change you wish to see in the world.
Well, I'll
Sorry.
say, Dominic, I think you said like the key word too, which is it's a choice. I think
Mm,
sometimes we forget that everything we do is a choice. It's something we choose. We either choose to react in a good way or a bad way in every situation. That's where our control lies, is in that choice.
mhm. What was
Absolutely.
Rosalind said? What's the other word for react? What's the better way to do it? You
Mm.
Oh my goodness.
respond.
Yes,
You
respond.
respond. You don't
Yes,
react. Right.
exactly.
Yeah. And the word conscious has been on my, it's kind of a virtue signaling, right? Conscious uncoupling, conscious. But that really is what we all need to be doing. I think that's what we're being called upon to do. And I'm actually going to take this opportunity to get back on track a little bit. I love our tangents, but it does. You were hinting just now, Evan, that you don't really have an agenda as far as what you want to impart or the difference you want to make in the world. You just want to show up and be your best self. I'm offering, if we all did that, the world would be a better place.
Yes.
Mid pandemic, right, the height of divisiveness, where I think even a Q-tip got politicized. I
hmm
said, I offered that to my sister, like, actually, the 300 and something page book I just wrote was about dissolving imaginary divisiveness by understanding the role of semantics, perspective, being judicious. That's a whole book about how a lot of these divides are imaginary, right? And if we just learn to be a little more judicious and, and understand the role, like I said, of all of those forces, there's a hell of a lot more that we share than the opposite. And she's literally, the answer was, well, that's pretty Pollyanna. I was like, oh my God, but it's the only solution, right?
Right, 100%. And I think it is the only solution. I don't see any. There's no legislation or no
Right,
yeah,
policy.
nothing that you can to enforce that type of change. Right, it
Mhm,
is just a conscious intent followed by conscious action
mhm,
that is going to have the ripple effect. And I think we need to trust in our own ripple effect in the
mm.
profound impact that it can have on the world.
I
You
think
know.
there's a lot of futility. There's a lot of people throwing their hands in the air because it is a big bad world. And even when it comes to voting, like
hmm
that's symbolic of like, do I really make it? Does my one little vote really make a difference? If we all thought, right, if we all gave up,
hmm
we'd go to hell in a handbasket much more quickly. So,
Exactly.
but hope is right. We're all just trying to renew hope all day, every day that humanity is redeemable.
hmm
And actually, like I said, I'm going to take this opportunity and I'm going to actually read the question so I don't botch it. But because I see you really as a sage and a thought leader, um, I'm not going to let you off the hook and say I'm just trying to show up and be my best self every day. I
Okay.
know the story of interconnectivity had not an agenda, but it had a message, and I'm on board for that message. Could you encapsulate the concept of that book?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. The idea of just showing up as my best self is the way to um not what's the right way? Impose and not try
Mm.
and impose my own what I hold myself standard to on others
Right,
because I
but
think
also I'm going to
yeah,
let you off the hook too and say by being your best self, you're honoring our interconnectivity. So it,
absolutely.
it is one and the same, but I'm just
Right.
asking you to share it, in a slightly different words, I
Yeah,
guess.
for sure. And the concept of that book really I started by talking about what does it even actually mean to be interconnected? Like
Mhm.
what is that? What does that look like? Because we're
Entanglement.
all we're all in our own separate bodies. We have our separate lives, our separate selves. I am Evan. Um, we are, three individuals having a conversation, right? So there is a level of physical separateness that is present and uniqueness in each individual that we should honor and recognize and celebrate, right?
Mhm.
There is no one conforming way that we need to be per se.
Mhm.
But the concept of interconnectivity, it's on a deeper level, right? You could think about, like, if you were to go into a forest, for example, and you see all the trees and you have separate trees and they all have their own unique features and branches and leaves and this and that, right? But if you were to go down beneath the surface of the trees, they're all interconnected through the roots and the
Mhm.
mycelium network that's underneath there.
Mm.
And so they're constantly communicating. They're feeding each other. If there's a tree that is sick and diseased, other trees will send that tree extra nutrients. They
Mm.
will help
Mhm.
revive the fellow trees
Mhm.
within their forest, right? They'll alert when there's predators. If there's termites attacking in one tree, the tree sends a signal through the roots in the mycelium network to the other trees that allows the other trees to put up a defense network that
Amazing.
actually will poison the termites and prevent them from eating the tree,
Right.
right? So you could arguably make the point that even though you have individual trees, a forest is actually one superorganism,
Right.
right? And
I
so
don't
I
want to
think
throw you off track, but you know about mushrooms too, right? The largest
Mhm.
organism in the world is a single network of shrooms.
Right, exactly, and I think it speaks to that exact same point where we are the same in that way.
Mhm.
Now, it can be difficult to perceive that when we're strictly identifying as just the physical body,
Right.
because we all are separate in that sense. But when you start unpacking what is our spiritual nature,
Mhm.
well, we do come from the same source. We do all contribute to the collective unconscious and the collective conscious, right?
I'm going to
Y-
help you make your case though in a mechanistic way, and you will
Please
get
do.
back to this, and you will continue to explain what the concept of your book, The Story of
Hmm.
Interconnectivity, is. But I'm going to help you make your case because this is largely what my book was about. It
Hmm.
is mechanistic. It is Newtonian. It's pretty inarguable, right? Our interconnectivity.
Hmm.
So. Entanglement is alive and well, right? We all know the
Hmm.
concept of entanglement. That is embraced by science, and that's the ultimate in right rational empiricism.
Hmm.
Um, but also there's non-local communication within an organism, right? You have one cell communicating through the cell wall to its neighboring cell, but you also have this inexplicable non-local communication. It's energetic, right?
Hmm.
So I would say when you look at, I think it's called the 12th monkey, is it? The 12th monkey, do you know that concept?
I don't think I do personally. No.
It's controversial. It's not airtight, but it's the idea that a behavior in a sort of isolated gene pool, once it's entered a population, it will magically appear on the other side of the planet when there's geographically no contact. And so there's a million demonstrations that aren't yet fully explained, right, of how non-local communication of energetic signaling, not through the cell wall, right, is shuttling around little proteins, little molecules all day, every day, creating new proteins and da da da. So I'm just kind of throwing that in there that
Mm.
we're interconnected in a million ways. And I loved hearing this. Do you ever happen to read Bruce Lipton, either um, The Biology of Belief? That's the one I read.
Ooh, that's on my list. I have not
Oh
read
my
that
God.
one yet, but that
It'll rock
is
your world, but it'll validate everything you're saying because one concept from that book that really just was beautiful to me, it wasn't just persuasive or convincing, it was just really beautiful, is that before we had tissues, right, and systems and organisms, when they were just really sophisticated single cell organisms, they still formed villages, they formed populations, they survived through non-local energetic signaling to just chemical threats, environmental threats. They created the responses, and they're called growth or protection responses by signaling to other right single-celled organisms within that community. We were depending on one another and forming communities before right we even became sophisticated organisms. We were single-celled organisms,
Mm. Right.
right? So we were built out of that. We
Yeah.
were we were built out of community and interdependency.
Right. That's the foundation of who we are. And that's, I think, what I, in the book, I'm really attempting to hone in on that foundation.
Mhm,
And from there, I think once we get a grasp on that interconnected foundation, we can begin to unpack a lot of the beliefs that we hold that might
mhm,
be rooted in this myth of separation.
mm,
It's a
mhm,
story of separation that we're telling ourselves,
mm,
right? What is the psychological aspects of our culture that are running through me that I'm feeding a story of separation? Where is it that I might be, to use the word of the year, it's divisive,
mhm,
right? Where,
mhm,
where am I feeding into that within myself, right?
mhm,
And it's really just about first acknowledging it. There isn't always a quick fix solution to our triggers or to our pain or to our healing or to our patterns and habits. But it comes back to what we were talking about earlier with choices and the power of choices. And so, through that, you can begin to choose to make a process of healing a priority, a process of transformation a priority, right?
mhm,
And it gives us a sense of purpose. It allows us to come back to the heart,
mm,
right? And actually go into the world from the perspective of recognizing this is who I am. I am part of this much greater whole. We could
mm,
argue, like the trees in the forest, humanity is a super organism in its true nature. And I
mhm,
want to help feed that. I want to be
mhm,
like that one cell that is doing all it can to not just survive but thrive,
mhm,
right? And create a world that is thriving. And so the book is about exploring those concepts within ourselves
mhm,
and how to come back to the heart and start the process of healing. As I mentioned before the podcast, there's a few things I'm adding to it and rewriting and
mhm, mhm.
including in.
Right.
And based on the last couple of years that I've experienced, I think that I can speak much more to, well, what does it actually mean to heal the heart in particular? What does it actually
Right.
mean to love more fully? Right? What does it
Mhm,
actually mean to heal?
mhm,
Because like we were saying, there isn't a state of being healed. It's just the process of continually healing and unpacking
right.
as we go along, as we
Mhm,
do face more troubles or shadows within the world or within ourself, when those
mhm.
blind spots come into our awareness. So it's really meant to be sort of a guidebook in that way to
Beautiful.
begin exploring.
I love it. Yeah, you might have already answered this next question then, but I pretty much wrote down in what you just said. I heard that the healing that we're all invested in, right? I mean, I guess what I heard a little bit is like you do adapt or die. So, in my view, the evolution of our norm, I call it the noosphere, all those invisibles, our policies, our norms, mores, principles, ethics, all those things are, we would have perished a long time ago if that wasn't evolving along with our biology. And so I guess I'm just going to read it. And if there's more to say on this, you might have
Mm.
already answered it. But I wrote, again, you hinted at that we all can contribute if we look, and these are my words, look beyond the end of our fucking nose, right?
Yep.
And acknowledge our interconnectivity that, yeah, maybe it's worth preserving. Maybe this huge organism that is humanity is kind of worth saving. So the way I wrote the question was with the caveat that there is an entire universe beyond this tiny rock and its inhabitants, meaning humanity. I think we'd agree that all good things come to an end, right? And then you hear this popular sentiment. I think even Julia Roberts said it in that one documentary. Yeah, the Earth will be fine without us, right?
Mm.
And then Rosalind was like, "But no, no, no! That like you don't just give up on humanity. We have a great relationship with this rock that we live on. So
Mhm.
it's kind of an easy, lazy way out to say, the Earth will be fine without us, as if we're not redeemable. Anyway, assuming what we've got going on here is a pretty good thing worth saving, right?
Mm.
What is the biggest, and you might have answered it, what is the biggest existential threat to man's survival or
Oof.
proliferation, if you want to put it that way?
Mm.
Or to the evolution of the noosphere that I hinted at a moment ago. What is the biggest threat, first of all? Then, of course, there's a follow up question. Is it the
Yeah,
separation?
that's a beautiful question. Yeah, I would say the biggest threat to our survival is ourselves, and it's the story of separation that we have come to actually inhabit because you're right, there are so many beautiful redeemable qualities about us, because not only do we get to inhabit the earth,
Mm,
right? We get to explore, we get to create, we get to recognize beauty, we get to hold
mm,
sacred this tiny rock that's floating in the abyss of the universe, right?
mm,
We get to actually perceive and experience that, and just for that reason alone, it can't be just, I mean, for me, that can't be not meaningful. That can't not mean something, right? We get to experience love. We get to have all of these beautiful, beautiful experiences,
mhm,
and really, it's just because this world is in the culture. It's just a byproduct of our creation and our stories. It's
mhm.
nothing. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's,
Yeah,
it's
well, that's why I think we're saying that if we do our inner work, then what we manifest collectively as humanity, how could it not transform, right?
right, exactly. Because really, I truly believe that the macro level, the collective, is just it's a macrocosm for the
Hmm.
individual,
Of
right?
course,
And
right?
so when you have a shift within individuals, surely over time, as more and more individuals make that shift, that will
Hmm.
shift at the macro level in terms of how we organize ourselves and what it is we prioritize and the ways in which we choose to, I think organize is a good way to put it.
Hmm.
What are
Hmm.
the
The way we
systems we have?
organize, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, what are the systems we have in
Yeah,
place
I
and
love that you
everything?
just brought up the whole macro level because I was just thinking that because I'm wondering, and this is, and I'd love to hear what your opinion is on this. But sometimes I think kind of some of the decisiveness that we have, where where you see such that divide
Mhm.
in culture, on a societal level. Is it because we're letting the macro level influence so much to the micro level that we're
Mm,
forgetting that it needs to be from micro level to
mm.
macro versus macro to micro?
Right.
We're watching too much news. Yeah, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. And I definitely think that's a part of it, because I think we forget to look to our communities and to the people around us to really um, give our worldview in a
Mhm.
sense, right? It's
Right.
so easy to feed into what we're seeing take place at a macro level and let that shape our perception, and then let our how we show up
Right.
be what we just saw on the
I think
TV.
we're letting, yeah, I think we're letting the status quo have its way with us. We're letting
Mm-hmm.
social conditioning run the show.
Right, exactly. Well, and that's actually, this kind of feeds into something you brought up earlier and kind of hinted at as a question, was why I used the word tyranny.
Hmm.
Because
Mm,
I think it was a deliberate choice to use that word instead of
mm,
the word fear, and I think because the greatest tyranny we really face, it it is in our own minds, it's in our own perception, it's in our own ways of that we choose to live. If we're choosing to live in fear, if we're choosing to be
mm,
divisive, and tyranny can exist on a collective level if it doesn't exist within the hearts and minds of the individuals, right? It just can't
mhm,
operate because it feeds on fear,
mhm.
it feeds on the
I guess
deconstruction
I'm
of
going
our
to look up.
values.
I don't even really know the I know what a tyrannical dictator is. I know what
Right.
a tyrant is. You're making me rethink the word, right? I mean, it's terrorism. Another, we're allowing ourselves to be terrorized by the stories that we're internalizing
Hmm.
on autopilot. Is that
Essentially.
related?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think so, because if we're taking just the idea that the macro reflects the micro, whether it's on a global scale, I mean, it would also include words, right? It would include
Of course.
these concepts that we have become so familiar with, and I
I was
think
going to, yeah, words are just a way of taking concepts and, right, interpreting them in the perceptual realm anyway.
right, right,
Um,
exactly. So
Before I
if
move on to the next question, though, I want to back you up on a couple things you said. All right, what I heard and what you said. Like,
mhm,
if the biggest existential, not to put words in your mouth, but if you want to commit to this idea that yes, our imaginary separation is the biggest existential threat to our survival, I would agree because here we are, right? The only organism that destroys its own habitat
mhm,
systematically all day, every day. Like, I think if we had a bigger appreciation of not just the circle of life, but yeah, not just the human race, but our interconnectivity with this entire ecosystem, right? Then maybe we wouldn't be destroying the planet. or destroying
Mhm.
our habitat. So I'm just kind of backing you up on that. I
Yeah.
think there's a million ways in which acknowledging our interconnectivity would solve a lot of our problems. I mean, from manifest destiny and capitalist greed and exploitation and colonization and marginalization, all of those things, right, are the
Yeah.
product, I think, of separation run amok.
Hmm. I would agree with you. Yeah. And
So,
and one thing to kind of back up what you're saying is it's a lot of times when we're talking about these things, it almost feels like I try not to make it like a this dreamy concept that's large and unachievable. And it's like, how do you
mm,
even bring that down to a practical level for people?
mm,
It is as simple as showing up. It is as simple as switching your heart, mind, and body and
mm,
trusting that that in itself is sending the ripple effect into the
mm,
world and creating the difference. Because,
mm,
like we were saying, there is no policy that's going to, as soon as you attempt to enforce love. That's why I called it to martial love
right,
against
right.
tyranny. You can't actually
Enforce it.
yeah, you can't militarize love. You
Right, I
can't
love it.
force it on people.
Right.
So it's about really a subtle shift of awareness, and that is
Hmm.
the most practical thing you can actually even do to even get the ball rolling on this,
Well,
which
tell me
should
if
make it a priority.
yes. Well, tell me if this relates. Love keeps coming up, right?
Hmm.
And this Pollyanna idea that if we started with the man in the mirror, now I'm quoting Michael Jackson, right?
Hmm.
Before
I
it
love that
was
song.
right, but be the change you wish to see in the world. That was Gandhi, right?
Hmm.
It's the same idea. Start with the man in the mirror. But I would say if you kind of take the sentiment that it takes a village, right? That we're all one big tapestry. I think if we all, and there's a million ways of putting it, I said work a minute ago. I don't think it's drudgery, but if we all did look beyond the end of our nose, acknowledged our interconnectivity, acknowledged that by nurturing our inner right our inner relationship with collective consciousness, that the ripple effect would do its job, because we are all a village, right? And it takes a village. I think if we took the time to, I don't know, have a practice, meditate every day, or have some kind of spiritual practice, we would automatically get in touch with our unique authentic gifts, which are subjective. They're unique to the individual, right? We would be called upon, we would hear the calling, number one, right? And then we would contribute it back. So I say amen to political activists, because I don't have that in me. I'm not here for that. I'm here to be an artist and change minds by touching hearts, if that makes
Yep.
sense. So we would discover our unique, authentic gifts. We would be called upon to contribute them back in our own unique way. Thank God for militant activists, right?
Hmm.
Thank God for our military. And Aristotle would have called it the spirited element, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's problematic too. But anyway, I just think there's a million ways in which we can help, not just in this idealistic march toward human potential, but get us out of the trouble we're in.
Yeah, for sure. Because coming back to yourself, once you have that foundation, then that's where the real work begins on the ground within your local community, with your neighbors, in your, whatever your job is, whatever your creative expression is. Once you have that foundation, the work that you put out there is going to be the expression of
Hmm.
that foundation,
Yeah,
right? And
and I'm just
yeah.
offering, and not everybody is going to like be able to go there, but I'm offering the idea that through non-local communication, energetic communication, the actual collective consciousness, the sum of all of our subjective experiences, whatever you want to call that, God or collective intelligence, source, there's a million words for it. It is actually sending energetic signaling, saying, here's what's needed lest we perish.
Hmm.
Here's what's needed, and it is nothing less than a calling or a ministry.
Hmm. Absolutely, I agree with you 100% on that.
Yeah. And even if somebody's called upon to build, put one brick on top of the other and build a building, it's we're all here, right, for to serve a different role
Mhm.
in humanity's dialectic.
Mhm. 100%. And it's beautiful to honor each unique role and
Mm,
honor each calling of expression.
yeah. That's why I love the word amen. Just amen to all of it.
Amen. Amen, brother.
Well, I don't think that means being complacent, or, you know what I mean, or lackadaisical. I think it's really, truly. Anyway, there's obviously a lot of people that are disconnected, and maybe that's where the social societal ills kick in, right? And
Mhm.
I think we're kind of saying the same thing in a million different ways here, right?
Well,
Love, it's just love.
it's the foundational. If to me it feels like if there's one foundational truth that we can keep coming back to, it's that.
Mhm.
Like at the end of the day, we
Mm-hmm.
can say it in a million different ways, yet it's all the same thing, and it speaks the same language, right? As a language we
Mm-hmm.
can all understand when we can get past the mind, and we can get past our conditioning and what we want to hold on to, or our blockages, whatever it might be. Everybody has unique circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we can recognize, okay, there is truth in that. It's a truth that I can feel. It's not a truth I can always truly capture and express in the perfect way. I think a great artist, it demonstrates that, but it leaves us wanting more, right? In a masterpiece, it makes us want to see even more, to explore it even more, right? And so,
The
um,
mystery, in other words.
because it is a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
It goes. There's no true word. That's why you have God, source. You have all these
Right,
different
right.
ways of expressing. There's no one word that can actually, you that puts a pretty bow on it, where it's like, oh, that's
Well,
it right
that's
there.
why I love the word ineffable, right?
Mhm.
Um, I guess in ancient Hebrew, anyway. I don't know about modern, but the word God is not to be spoken
Mm,
because it's completely ineffable. So
right,
I love that
exactly.
idea. It's a little romantic, but anyway. So I feel like we have kind of diagnosed, right, the biggest existential threat to man, maybe as our
Mm,
disconnectedness or our separation.
Mhm.
So the next follow up question was this: a popular sentiment posits that when faced with a challenge, the question we must ask ourselves is, what am I being called upon to grow? In other words, what quality must I grow in myself to meet this challenge? I'm sure you've heard something similar, right?
mhm.
So, what did I write? So, on a macro level, in the face of this existential threat that we just laid out, how must we adapt in order to persist, to thrive, to evolve toward human potential? Or put another way, in the spirit of this podcast, what is the new story that we must collectively tell about the human condition?
Mm. What is the new story to tell? That's beautiful. I think the new story we'll start to tell it once we truly learn how to first listen and pause and reflect, right? I think that's the first thing to even begin to understand, because we only hold one tiny sliver, one tiny fraction of the story within our own uh awareness, right? I have my life, and I connect with others and learn from them and learn from other people's experiences, but there is so much that I don't know on a personal level, right? And
Mm,
that's all of us. So I think the first step is really learning how to listen to what are the stories we are telling ourselves right now. What is the
mm,
story that the collective is telling? Can I listen to that, process it, digest it, dissect it, look at it at all angles, and begin to put it up against my own experiences and my own understanding and my own values that I hold? If we have this foundation, if we start cultivating this foundation of love within ourselves, well,
mm,
does this story that we're telling ourselves actually, does it actually meet that standard? And for the collective level, a lot of the answer is going to be no. It's going to be a resounding no.
mm,
There's a lot of divisiveness. There's a lot of um, division perpetuated within various aspects of our systematic approach. And so once we're able to actually listen and diagnose, then it's about coming together with one another to craft it together. And that's through what we were just talking about, honoring the unique expression, right? The new stories are going to be told and expressed certainly through the visionaries and through the artists and through the poets
mm,
to
mm,
capture the work that's being done. But it is going to be about building systems that are representative of that quality of love
mm,
and connectedness. We have the resources to create a world where children don't have to go hungry, and everybody can have. And I'm not trying to paint some sort of utopia necessarily, because the idea of a utopia, I think as soon as you label something a utopia, it's bound to fall into disarray, and
Prove you wrong.
right, exactly. We're never gonna have. We're never. I think we need to accept that we're never gonna have a perfect world because we are not perfect.
Mm,
There's always going to be darkness to the light. There's night and day for a reason,
mm,
right? So I think we have to come to acceptance that, we're always going to be learning. We're always going to be growing. There's always going to be more work to do. And all
mhm,
that we can actually do is work to build the foundation that is built on love and built on compassion and built on listening to one another and trusting in one another. I
mhm,
think trust is such a key factor because we don't trust each other in this world. We
mm,
don't we don't
Yeah.
trust somebody who holds a different view. We don't trust
mm.
somebody who doesn't think the same way we do. We view it as we kind of kick into the survival mode, fight or flight or freeze, right?
Hmm. Right,
And
right.
that
Well, but also you've talked the episode with your professor that really got my attention. You talked about these tribal instincts, right?
mhm,
I think we've evolved out of some of these, like demonizing the other, right, or scarcity of resources,
mhm,
which right stokes fear, and I think we're seeing it all play out in the election cycle and the campaigning, right? But
mhm,
it's almost not avoidable in my world. I just want to ask this question:
mhm,
would you agree that I think you see a lot of people, yeah, they're indulging identity politics and forging a common enemy in order to bond against the common enemy. That's what a lot of the divisiveness is.
yes.
Um, so I see people adopt, in the spirit of this podcast, adopting stories right and left that don't just inform their worldview, but kind of dictate it, and bonding in those. Let's just be honest, conspiracy theories. So
Mhm,
there's a lot of people indulging deep, dark rabbit holes in the internet and adopting hook, line, and sinker conspiracy theories. The way I look at it is I'm an art, and you said something about artists and creatives being our prophets, and I want to go back to that. I love you for saying that.
mhm,
But I would say, as an artist, I've always seen through the matrix, is the way I put it. I've never bought social conditioning to begin. And I'm a gay man too. So I have good reason to reject social norms for the most part. And right, I've spent my whole life seeing through them
mhm,
as such. But I've done a lot of acid, I've done shrooms, I've smoked a lot of pot. I had my day, right, of like
mhm,
not just adopting conspiracy theories, but being skeptical. I think it's good to be skeptical of our institutions, right?
mhm,
However, I learned probably in my 20s to take things at face value, right?
mhm.
Unless
Yep.
there's a really good reason.
Yeah.
So I see us as culturally being in sort of an adolescent phase where we're kind of high on seeing through the matrix for the first time, but we're not very practiced at it. I'm going to exclude myself from that. I've been doing it my entire life, so I'm very practiced at it. And I now take things at face value. I don't have a paranoid bone in my body, and I don't adopt, you name it,
Mhm.
chemtrails, Pizzagate, none of it all rolls off. So do you agree that we're kind of just high on not just being skeptical at the moment, but actually a little paranoid?
Oh, I think definitely. And I think the reason people can fall into deep, deep, dark rabbit holes is because a they want to point the finger at someone or something as the reason as the way things are,
Like
right?
scapegoats?
Right. Kind of creating a scapegoat for the reality that we're living in. And I'm all for people wanting the truth and to
Mm,
uncover whatever's going on behind the scenes, because there's things we don't see and there's things we don't know, and that's just a part of the world that we're living in. But
mhm.
there we don't need to find the common enemy and hang them like it's the Salem witch trials.
Well, I was about to say, like, we come up with the higher the stakes get, the more elaborate the explanations, right?
Totally.
So, an unprecedented pandemic, you're going to go way out in the weeds in coming up with a really elaborate
Hmm.
explanation. Sorry. It's so funny you would mention the Salem witch trials because I just posted this mainly for a friend of mine.
Hmm.
I just wrote like I'm going to get in trouble here, but I just wrote, we all agree, right, that the Salem witch trials was a mass hallucination. If you're old enough to remember the McMartin preschool trials, we agree it was a mass hallucination. You could say Hitler, right, relied on a lot of the same tactics. A mass hallucination. Fear. Fear is the reason people adopted those hook, line, and sinker.
Hysteria.
Right, exactly. Hysteria. So I'm sorry, this one will be on the books someday. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Well,
This moment will be in the history books and it'll be diagnosable. Sorry.
Yeah. So here's a thought to that, Dominic. So as you were talking, because it's one of my favorite things to say to people when they start to get, fear starts to set in, hysteria starts to set in, hallucination, whatever term you want to use for
Delusion's a good one.
yeah, getting delusional, whatever. It's usually because change is coming, and it's a change that you're reluctant to.
Mm-hmm.
But where I'm going with that is this, and I'm literally going to put this on well, I shouldn't say if. I'm trying to decide if I'm going to do private practice or not. But when the day comes, if I do private practice, I'm going to put on one of my walls when people walk into the lobby is the only constant is change. Because if you think about that, the world's always changing. Every morning we wake up, it's a new day, right? Isn't that the whole point? Dawn to, dusk to dawn. It's the change, light to dark. Seasons change. I mean, we get older. And I think we kind of get, at least in my mind, I think where you see people dig in, it's like they don't want to. They like the status quo. They like being comfortable. Nobody likes being uncomfortable. But I think it's in that, going back to what I said kind of earlier in the podcast, it's that discomfort. It's when we're in those shadow moments.
When we grow
and we learn.
Crucibles, my sister would call them, right?
Yes.
We're living a big crucible. I love it. I support you in putting that on your wall when the time comes.
I think it's definitely needed because change is the only constant. And when there's change invokes fear because people are comfortable in the world that they've created for themselves. And people only change usually when they're forced to change, right? That's usually when the change happens. It's when I heard a good quote about that, and I'll probably butcher it because I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of, people change when the pain of staying the same hurts more than the pain of the change itself.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Was that Michael Beckwith by chance? Does that ring a bell?
I think it might have been. Yeah.
Well, he talks. I mean, it's the same concept, but he says pain pushes till inspiration pulls. So the archetype of the dark night of the soul means that, yeah, you've got to hit bottom to hear that still small voice that's calling you in a new direction. I'm just tying it back to story. Right. Those are archetypal templates. You have that dark night of the soul. I've been there. Like I thought I was doing okay in life. Really, I thought I was on it, and I always thought, well, at least I'm lucid about this spiritual journey. At least, we're not all objective about ourselves, but at least I'm lucid, and I thought I was doing okay. But man, the universe can surprise you. And I say that if you're not paying attention to something, the universe will speak louder and louder to get your attention.
Every time, always will smack you. It tries to be gracious at first. It really does. It tries to be gracious. And when we ignore those little gracious pulls, it's like, all right, let me smack you in the face a little bit.
Let me slap you down.
There you go. Now you'll change. You could have had it easier, but it is what it is.
Yep. Anyway, but again, thank God for those moments because we wouldn't. Well, I do think adapt or die. I'm a Scorpio, for God's sake. I'm so nostalgic. And I think this is just another topic entirely, but I think that a real popular sentiment is, I'm a big fan of Eckhart Tolle, right? Be in the moment. Be in the moment. I'm all for that. But I'm sorry, my memories are what make me a writer. This came up earlier. I was going to mention the default mode network, right? Our whole personality is the product of the me, the I. Our whole identity is based in our memories and our conception, our concept of who we are. So anyway, I cherish my memories. They're what make me a writer. They actually make life rich. They keep me, my memories keep me warm on winter nights. But we live in a culture that shames like clinging to the past or perseverating on the past. Anyone that values the past is largely shamed. Would you kind of agree with that?
Anyone who values the past is largely shamed.
Shamed. Yeah, it's we live in a
Mm,
culture that says move on, you got to adapt or die, and there's not a lot of I'm just speaking as a Scorpio. I don't.
mm,
I think there's. It's really fashionable to say let go of the past, move on, or at the very least be in the moment.
right.
And we Scorpios that care about the past are seen as clinging to the past or perseverating on it or whatever. I think you can find a balance, and I think we can cherish the past because they say, God forbid we forget the horrors of history lest they repeat themselves.
Mm.
Sometimes it's
Mhm.
necessary to kind of tell the stories of the past. But yeah, maybe our job is to reframe them as aspirational, if that makes sense.
Mm, absolutely. And that's a really good point because it kind of ties into some of the other ideas I've been playing with lately about what is the right balance between letting go versus holding on, right? I mean, if you study as a monk in Buddhism, for
Mm,
example, you're letting go of everything. You hold on to nothing. Attachment is the root of desire, and desire
mm,
creates suffering.
mhm.
But at the same time, you could make the argument, well, desire is what fuels our impulse for creativity and our impulse to,
Absolutely.
have a life that is meaningful. So
Mhm.
we can't just let go of everything and start in what would our foundation be
I
realistically?
agree. I agree. I want to follow up on that. So passion, right? That's another word for desire, passion.
Hmm.
That is our connection. That is our engagement in life. And so I think artists will never give that up. And, I think it's very clinical to, if you want to be your best spiritual self, according to a lot of philosophic traditions and spiritual traditions, that kind of detachment actually can detach you from your humanity. So I think my sister is a great example of just finding that balance where, you know what, this sensual realm is where we're meant to experience passion and connection and sensuality and what's the other word? Oh, like romance and all those things that are attachments. So the Four Agreements is a good example. Did either of you read that by chance?
Yeah, Don Miguel
Yeah.
Ruiz. Yep.
Yeah, I think you posted that recently, Virginia.
I did recently post that.
Yeah,
I did.
I read it. It was a bestseller. I loved it. I can't argue with it, but unfortunately, it was handed to me by an ex, who
Hmm.
I saw certain things in the book that were him. And
Hmm.
so the only contention I had with that book was and I do think if you do any one of the four agreements in the book, the rest fall into place actually. But when it came to that detachment, don't take anything personally. Okay, we all learned this a long time ago. If somebody doesn't like your shirt, it's largely about them and not you. That's a good one.
Yep.
When it comes to a stranger that doesn't like your shirt, aren't our relationships in agreement that, you know what, I actually do care what you think, and I'm actually not going to compromise myself, right? For you, but you care about what your loved ones think and you consider them in your decision making. So I just kind of resisted that one. Like, no, we're not all islands. Our interconnectivity is our bond, our agreement, our covenant, right? The code. It's the only code. So I like being impeccable with your word. I dated somebody that said, words are cheap. It's actions that tell the true story. That's another popular sentiment.
Hmm.
And I kind of agree. Words are cheap, but that's really convenient for somebody who's been deceived or betrayed.
Hmm.
For those who've been lucky enough, right, where betrayal is not a theme in their life, you might say our codes, our agreements with one another are all we have.
Yeah,
It's fascinating, isn't it? Life is a
absolutely.
Rorschach test.
Absolutely. Well, and I've to speak to that point directly about the words being cheap. And it's somebody who's a anybody who writes or does poetry is going to find value in word, right? I mean, it's just a
Mhm.
natural byproduct of that. So I have faced betrayal
Mm,
and through words not aligning with action, and
mhm,
it hurts that much more as somebody who does value in the word, right?
mhm.
Because it and I can see why somebody would lose faith in the
Of
word,
course, of
you
course.
know
But
because
one of the rules is be impeccable. One of the four agreements is be impeccable with your word.
Mhm.
And so thankfully, my daddy raised me right on that one. like integrity, being a man of your word was so valued on both sides of my family. So I do think that kind of saves you from that one, right? But it takes two to tango. You know, you're lucky if you meet a partner who's impeccable with his or her word.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think as long as you make that a conscious, as long as you're consciously being impeccable with your word, you tend to find very quickly whether other people are impeccable with their word or not. And so you don't have to go too deep with them if you realize right off the bat, oh, this person's word isn't their actions don't align with their words.
Mm.
Maybe this isn't gonna be the love of my life, or they're whatever
I
it
think they
might
call
be.
that a red flag, maybe.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
red
red
flag.
flag. So, yeah.
Well, we're coming up on an hour and 45 minutes. I'm glad it went long because there's some good stuff in here. With a little bit of editing, I think we got into some good territory. But with the caveat, of course, I would love to have you back on. I know you're busy, but please be a regular on this show.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime you want to have me on, I would love it. This has been a lot of fun. I feel like we're in a way, it almost feels like we're just scraping the surface
That's how I
of the
feel.
conversations.
Truly. But there's some good stuff in here. I think there's grains of things people will benefit from. We're going to start doing panels too, by the way, if you'd like to be a
Ooh.
talking head. I know that's a pretty juicy offer.
Yeah, I'd love
You
to.
want we might take themes and have some of our regulars on to do sort of panels and get more perspectives. So anyway, I'll hit you up about that. But is there anything you'd like to close with? I feel like believe it or not, everything was kind of under the umbrella of storytelling. I
It
think everything,
was.
yeah.
It was.
Maybe.
I can I read you a quick poem to summarize?
Absolutely. Yes. I'm sorry. I forgot to go back.
Oh
to
no,
that.
don't even worry about it. Well, and this will kind of I guess is a good I'll read the poem itself that's called To Martial Love
Mm,
dot dot dot, and it's just
mhm,
kind of a way to summarize my own understanding of whether it's good versus evil, living in love, and how we actually kind of actualize a lot of these concepts that we were talking about. And then
mhm,
it's funny is when I was talking to you, I didn't even mention this one as a possibility of
mhm,
reading it,
mm.
but it popped into my mind a few minutes ago, like, oh, that one actually really would summarize well what we've been speaking to. I mean, it's only a few lines, so
No, it's perfect. Perfect. And it is the title of the book. So
right. Yeah. Well, this will kind of speak to I think everything we were just talking about. But
beautiful.
I'll leave the listeners with a quick poem here. So
Awesome. Love it.
we marshal love against tyranny by listening for calls of the heart when the path is hard to follow, resisting devilish temptations when tyranny drowns the mind in sorrow, offering a hand of unity across the perceived divide, finding strength to forgive, surrendering our past to the divine, looking in the eyes of broken men and still choosing to see their soul, speaking the language of truth and trusting others' right to know, showing up to give your all when times are at their hardest, courageously letting love in as a soul light in the darkness, daring to dream together, accepting if it's meant to be, coming back to presence, giving love the space to be free. And
Mm.
that's how you marshal love against tyranny.
Oh, wow. I love it. It's the handbook.
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm going to meditate on that. I'm going to listen back when I edit this, obviously. But I think there's a lot there, right? There's a lot to meditate on.
Yes.
And each poem can serve as a meditation. That's kind of how I write.
Absolutely. Beautiful.
Love
I
that.
hadn't even thought of that. Yeah. I'm a little bit slow on the uptake sometimes. I've got to live with, right? And when I see a movie, I don't immediately jump in. If somebody does that the minute you walk out of the theater, I usually go, let me talk to you tomorrow. Let me live with it
Right.
for a while and let it sink in. But I think I got the gist of that poem. It's really beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to
Felt-
start today. Woo!
Well, yeah, it felt like a very fitting way to end what was a profound conversation for me to take part in. It's connecting a lot of dots for me. You guys are hosting some tremendous conversations on here. So,
Mm. Well, thank you
it's
for being part of it. Virginia knows I like to take a really good ending and just like kind of beat the dead horse. So let's leave this one alone. That was a perfect way to end it.
oh, beautiful, beautiful. Well, I appreciate you guys and what you're doing, and like I said, I'll come back on anytime. I love this is what I live for. Conversations like this. So
Yes.
Awesome.
We loved having you. So we'll
All
definitely
right.
do that.
Thanks, man. And to our listeners, remember, life is story. and we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. See you next time.